إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, we are well within Unit 3, and we had last left off discussing the ruler Rabi'a ibn Nasr going to meet with the Shiqq and the Satih. So we'll pick up from there because there are some important details to review. And Imam ibn Hisham rahimahullah starts by saying, quote, قال ابن إسحاق فبعث إليهما فقدم عليه سطيح قبل الشق فقال له إني رأيت رؤيا هالتني ففزعت بها فأخبرني بها فإنك إن أصبت تأويلها قال أفعل رأيت حممة خرجت من ظلمة فوقعت بأرض تهمة فأكلت منها كل ذات جمجمة فقال له الملك ما أخطأت منها شيئا يا سطيح فما عندك في تأويلها. So the king Rabi'a ibn Nasr, as narrated by Ibn Ishaq, set off to both of them. He met the Satih first before the Shiqq. Close quote. Now, this may be something for the reader that appears to his mind. I've translated فَبَعْثَ إِلَيْهِمَا فَقَدَمَ عَلَيْهِ السَّطِيحِ, which, if you translate literally, would mean he sent for both of them, and the Satih came to him before the Shiqq. That would be the literal translation. But I've translated as the king promptly set off to both of them, and he met the Satih first before the Shiqq. Now, the reason why I've translated it that way is because Imam al-Suhaili, rahimahullah, who he dies 581, and he, rahimahullah, in his Rawd, the earliest commentary on the Sirat Nabawiyyah, mentions the question of the Shiqq and the Satih. Now, the Shiqq, we already have his name from our last dars. But the Shiqq is someone in which he is just a torso, so he has no arms and no legs, just the head down. This is the Shiqq. The Satih has his head, an arm on one side, and a leg on the other, but no arm on the other side and no leg on the other. So in this case, if it was he has an arm on the right side, then he has a leg on the left side, but no arm on the left side and no leg on the right side. So because of that information, it's not the case that they actually came to the king per se of their own accord, because they can't walk. So the king would have sent for them. So the king promptly set off to them. فَبَعْثَ إِلَيْهِمَا would mean that he sent for them, but I've translated as he went out to them, like they met at an agreed upon place, simply because the Satih and the Shiqq wouldn't be able to walk as human beings where they must have been brought. And they wouldn't have been brought to him for wherever they were. He would have had to have gone to them. In which case, after arriving at some pre-arranged location, that's where they would have had their conversation. So for that reason, I've translated it as the king promptly set off to them, to both of them, and he met the Satih first before the Shiqq. So that's why I've translated in that fashion. So I'll continue on from where the Imam ibn Hisham rahimahullah says, he says, quote, The king promptly set off to both of them. He met the Satih first before the Shiqq. He began by saying, I have seen a dream that has disturbed me, and I was frightened by it. Tell me the vision, as if you can tell me that, you can also tell me the meaning. The Satih began first by saying, very well, I shall tell you. You saw a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of Sudan and advancing, coming upon the land of Tahama, consuming everything in their way. The king said, you have spoken rightly, Satih. So, what does all of this mean? فقال أحلف بما بين حرتين من حنش ليهبطن أرضكم الحبش ليملكن ما بين أبين إلى جرش فقال له الملك وأبيك يا سطيح إن هذا لنا لغائظ مودع فمتى هو كائن أفي زماني هذا أم بعده. The Satih replied, I swear by all that is between the two hot lands. You shall be overthrown and turned out of your land by the Abyssinians, and they shall rule from Abiyan to Jurash. The king immediately replied, Satih, by your father, this is terrible news and a calamity to our ears. When is this going to happen? Is it going to happen in our time or after? Close quote. So the point that Rabi ibn Nasr is now asking about is the fact that they're going to be overthrown by a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of Sudan and advancing. Now, Abyssinia occupies today's Ethiopia up till Djibouti and part of what is referred to as Somaliland. And they're coming out of the Sudan because during this time, the country of Abyssinia was being ruled by the Orthodox Tawhedo Church. And they had an impressive army and powerful military victories that they had made during that time. If they were not the most powerful in East Africa, then they were certainly one of the most powerful. They're coming out of the Sudan area, which is covering South Egypt. So we're talking from Minya all the way down to what is called South Sudan today, and a little bit into Uganda, and a little bit into the northeastern portion of Uganda today. This is the Beled Sudan. So they're taking over this area. Understand historically, by this time, you have to remember, by the time of the Abyssinians coming into their own as an army and as a civilization that's Christian, understand that in 200 BC, the Greeks invade Egypt and pretty much end the system of the Nasuts or the pharaohs. They pretty much end that whole history as is known. Alexander the Great has Alexandria built, and it's walled off that northern portion from the rest of Egypt to make it part of the greater Greek, the greater Greek influence, the Hellenistic period that starts. By this time as well, after that point, Christianity arrives in Egypt. In fact, many Egyptian Christians, Coptic Christians, will say that they are the inheritors of the chair of Mark, which they say is one of the disciples of Nabawiyyah Isa. They'll say that they're the inheritors of his chair. So Egypt is Coptic. Ethiopia is Coptic. And influence is being put on the Sudan area to come into Christianity. There's a common folklore in some people's heads that Christianity was brought to the continent of Africa by invading armies. And this is utter and complete nonsense. The first Christians that come into the continent of Africa are monks and monastic people. And this is where it's coming from. It's penetrating into East Africa through missionaries that arrive in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia, along with Armenia, may have become the world's first Christian nations. There's different disputes because some say it's Armenia because Armenia was declared as such, whereas some say no, it was Abyssinia because Abyssinia's churches, the age of their churches, some of the oldest icons in the world, and the oldest depiction of Georges or St. George is in Ethiopia. So it's for that reason that some insist, no, it's Ethiopia rather than Armenia. But that's a discussion for the history books. The point that I'm making here is for you to try to get an understanding of what's going on, because during this time, the Abyssinians are powerful and will have found their way either across the Sinai land bridge of the Sinai Peninsula, which is today part of Egypt, which at the time was not. It was part of Arabiya. The Sinai Peninsula would not become part of Egypt until Muhammad Ali Pasha, during the Ottoman period, some more than 150 years ago, swept down and took it. But during this time, it's part of Arabiya. So the Abyssinians will have either used the land bridge or the Gulf of Aqaba to come across and to take over the Yemen. And if you look on a map of where Abyssinia is located today in the countries of Ethiopia, Somaliland and Djibouti and such, you'll see that the Gulf of Aqaba and that location, they're very close to today's Yemen. So they're going to come into the Yemen and take over. And so he makes reference to the fact that they'll be overthrown and turned out of your land by the Abyssinians, and they shall rule from Abyyan to Jurash, which is a wide expanse of that lower boot of Arabiya. So that's including what would, under the communist period, become North and South Yemen, but today is a unified Yemen. So they're sweeping that whole area in addition to their own kingdom. So understand that the Abyssinians are not just bringing conquest, but they're bringing their religion. And it's not just any Christianity. It is a Coptic form of Christianity, what we later call Coptic, the Orthodox Tawhedo Church. It's bringing this form of Christianity, which is monophysite, which is saying Christ had one nature rather than two, and these other disputes that are happening. So this is well after the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. This is after some of the battles. A fully organized Latin rite of the Catholic Church does not yet exist. There are no Protestants. So the denominations that you might think of, Methodist, Baptist, none of that exists. None of that exists at all. There is no Protestantism whatsoever. There are no Jehovah's Witnesses. There are no Christadelphians. None of that exists. The main churches that we're looking at are the Eastern churches, and the Latin rite has not fully coalesced into what is mistakenly called Roman Catholicism. It's the Latin rite of Christianity, but it's not fully coalesced. Instead, we know it as the Manichaea or the Melkite, which is composed of many different sections of Christianity, one of which becomes the Latin rite. So understand that this is what's happening during this time, and that Rabi ibn Nasr, who himself is not a Christian, is coming to him, to the Shiqq and the Satih, about this news and gravely concerned. So he wants to know, will this happen in his time? So he says, is this going to happen in our or my time or after? So we'll go back to what Imam ibn Hisham rahimahullah says. He says, quote, قال لا بل بعده بحين أكثر من 60 إلى 70 يمضين من السنين قال أفيدوم ذلك من ملكهم أم ينقطع قال لا بل ينقطع لبضع و70 من السنين ثم يقتلون ويخرجون منها هاربين. The Satih replied, no. It will come to pass afterward, by 60 or 70 years that will pass quickly. Rabi ibn Nasr asked, and will they always rule after that? Or will their kingdom be interrupted after a time? The king was now agitated. The Satih responded, actually, their reign will be interrupted after perhaps 70 or so many years. Then they will be killed and driven out while fleeing with much haste. قال ومن يلي ذلك من قتلهم وإخراجهم قال يلي ارموا ذا يزن يخرج عليهم من عدن فلا يترك أحدا منهم باليمن قال أفيدوم ذلك من سلطانه أم ينقطع قال لا بل ينقطع قال ومن يقطعه. The king asked after that, and what will follow the time after they are killed and driven out? The Satih gave the reply, Iram, the keeper of Yazan, will come out against them from the region of Aden. Then nothing will remain of this army in Yemen. The king asked, and in the time of Iram, will they always remain, or will their reign be interrupted? Satih replied, their reign will be interrupted. The king butt in, now excited at the news, who shall interrupt it? قال نبي زكي يأتيه الوحي من قبل العلي قال ومن هذا النبي قال رجل من ولد غالب بن فهر بن مالك بن النضر يكون الملك في قومه إلى آخر الدهر. The Satih said, a prophet pure in every way. He will come to him with revelation from before an uphill area to them. The king asked, who is this prophet to come? The Satih responded, he is a man from the children of Ghalib, the son of Fihr, the son of Malik, the son of An-Nadr, and the kingdom will remain in his people until the end of time. Close quote. So we see then here references being made that the rule over them shall be with the Abyssinians for 70 years, after which time they'll be driven out by a man from the Iram who bears the name Dhu Yazan or the Yazan. And he'll come at them from Aden in Yemen, and none of the army that had been ruling over them for those 70 years from Abyssinia shall remain after that. But after Iram takes over, through the leadership of Dhu Yazan, their rule will be interrupted. And when asked, the Satih replied that the takeover will be from a prophet pure in every way, Zakiyah, and he will come to him with revelation. And so when the king asked who the prophet was, rather than give the name, he gave his identity, to which the Satih said, he is a man from Ghalib, the son of Fihr, the son of Malik, the son of An-Nadr. Now Ghalib, the son of Fihr, the son of Malik, this is a very specific lineage. Now understand that the first one referred to as Quraysh was Fihr, the son of Malik. This is the first one who ever bore the title Quraysh. The very, very first one, which some historians and grammarians of language say that Quraysh is a reference to baby shark, and some say it's a reference to trade of some sort. So Fihr, the son of Malik, is the man Quraysh, and Ghalib is one of those children. So the man is going to be from the children of Ghalib, the son of Fihr, the son of Malik, the son of An-Nadr. Right, this is where this man is coming from. And then he says, and his kingdom, the kingdom will remain, or his governance will remain in his people until the end of time. So now you have him mentioning in no uncertain terms the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he gives this really careful layout to Rabi'a ibn Nasr. The layout is the Abyssinians shall come across from where they're from after securing the land of the Sudan, and they will take over for some 70 years, after which time they will be driven out by a man of Iram bearing the title Dhu Yazan, or the Yazan. He will drive them out and then he will remain. But after his time, shall come a prophet pure in every way, which we know now, having history having elapsed thousands of years, that this was none other than the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that his kingdom remains until the end of time, meaning that there's no stopping of what he brought, his revelation. Yemen won't be overthrown again in terms of a dispensation being brought or them being made to be something else. No, Islam remains among them until the end of this system of things, meaning creation as we know it. So we return back to what was said, quote, قال وهل للدهر من آخر قال نعم يوم يجمع فيه الأولون والآخرون يسعد فيه المحسنون ويشقى فيه المسيئون قال أحق ما تخبرني قال نعم والشفق والعسق والغلق إذا اتسق إنما أنبأتك به لحق. The king was confused by this speech and asked, "Is there an end of time to come after that so soon?" The reply was yes. It is a day in which the first and the last shall be gathered. Those who are righteous will be declared saved, and those who are wretched and lost shall be declared as such. The sinful is who they are. The king was unsure. "Are you sure of the truth of what you say?" The answer came as, "Most assuredly so. By the redness of the sunset, and by the redness of the sunrise, by the sunrise when it comes, I have only informed you of what is coming to pass very shortly." Close quote. So the king asks this question, and he says, "Is there an end of time to come after that so soon?" This is important because the Arabs at this time are in the Jahiliyyah period, the age of ignorance. And so unless you are a Christian or an Arab that's converted to Judaism, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has supernaturally protected you in which you're one of the Hunafa, those who are faithful in truth, unless you're one of those three categories, you do not affirm a resurrection. At this point, the Arabs, their position outside of those three categories I mentioned among them, which were in a minority, your position was that once thoroughly dead, that is the end of your life, that concludes the life cycle, and that there is nothing more to come thereafter. That was their position, that death represents finality. It's the end of the life cycle. And so the Satih confirms that there is a resurrection by saying, yes, it's a day in which the first and last will be gathered. Those who are righteous, yus'ad, will be declared righteous and saved, and the sinners will be lost and wretched, right, for all eternity. They'll be Shiqq. So then the king is unsure, because in his lifetime and those around him, he will not have heard this news before outside of the categories I've mentioned, to which he said, "Are you sure of the truth of what you say?" So the answer that the Satih gives is most assuredly so, by the redness of the sunset and the redness of the sunrise. So the truth of what I'm telling you is so clear, it's just as true as the sunrise that you see and as the sunset that you see. So just because you don't see these things, it doesn't mean they're not the case. Just like the things that you see the sunrise and its redness, you see the sunset and its redness, you see the sunrise when it comes. Just like all of those things that you see are true, what's about to come that you haven't seen yet, that is also true. And the Satih gives that ominous ending statement, "I've only informed you of what is coming to pass very shortly." So he's letting him know he doesn't have much time. Now the Imam Hisham rahimahullah, he goes on to quote, ثم قدم عليه شق فقال له كقوله للسطيح وكتبه ما قال السطيح لينظر أي يتفقان أم يختلفان فقال نعم رأيت حمما خرجت من ظلمة فوقعت بين روضة وأكمة فأكلت منها كل ذات نسمة. After this, the king quickly made his way to the Shiqq, then gave the same challenge he had given to Satih, but concealed what the Satih had said to him so he could listen and compare whether the statements of the two would agree or differ. The Shiqq told him, "You saw a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of the Sudan and advancing, consuming everything in their way." قال فلما قال له ذلك عرف أنهما قد اتفقا وأن قولهما واحد إلا أن سطيحا قال وقعت بأرض تهمة فأكلت منها كل ذات جمجمة وقال شق وقعت بين روضة وأكمة فأكلت منها كل ذات نسمة. The king knew that when that was said, their words agreed, and their statements one and the same. The only difference was a different word or statement by the Satih from what the Shiqq had used. The Satih had said, "You saw a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of Sudan and advancing upon the lowlands of Tehama, consuming everything in their way." While the Shiqq had remarked, "You saw a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of Sudan and advancing, consuming everything in their way between Rawda and Akmah." Close quote. Now, the significance of this is when he's mentioning that they're in agreement, the king recognizes the Satih, so he conceals what the Satih has told him because he doesn't want to prejudice the Shiqq when he comes forward so that they might collude, because he doesn't know whether they arrived at the same time to the pre-agreed spot, whether they might collude together, so he says nothing. And according to the wording in the Arabic, it appears that they came one after another. So he didn't give them time to rest or anything to where they might compare stories or say, what did the king say? Oh, he said that. He didn't give them time. One leaves and the other one comes right after. So he didn't want to give any opportunity for collusion or comparing stories or data. Now, once this happens, then he's able to see that there's only a slight difference. The slight difference being that the Satih, notices that the Satih said, "You saw a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of Sudan and advancing, coming upon the lowlands of Tehama, consuming everything in their way." Okay, so that's been established. But then the Shiqq says, "You saw a great army of Abyssinians coming out of the land of Sudan advancing, consuming everything in their way between Rawda and Akmah." Well, Rawda and Akmah is a little bit closer to where the king is living from his vantage point, which to him lets him know it's getting even closer, meaning that just within that short conversation between the Satih and the Shiqq, the immediacy of what's about to happen has come even closer. That's why he didn't say, "Oh, this is a contradiction." He recognized this is something, it's even closer now. Now it's even closer to happening, even though we only spoke for a matter of moments. With the Shiqq coming in and giving his analysis, all of a sudden, they're closer now. Because these two areas that are mentioned, the Rawda and the Akmah, they're actually closer to Rabi' ibn Nasr than Tehama. It's actually closer. So he's obviously concerned, but also knows the confirmation of what's being said. So let's go back to what the king then says. Imam Hisham rahimahullah goes on to say, quote, فَقَالَ لَهُ الْمَلِكِ مَا أَخْطَأْتَ يا شق منها شيئا فما عندك في تأويلها؟ قال أحلف بما بين حرتين من إنسان لينزلن أرضكم السودان فيغلبن على كل طفلة بنان ليملكن ما بين أبينا إلى نجران. The king said, "You have spoken rightly, Shiqq. So what does all of this mean?" The Shiqq said, "I swear by what is between the innermost portions of man. There shall come down to you a people from the land of the Sudan, and you shall be overthrown and turned out of your land by the Abyssinians, and they shall rule from Abiyan to Najran." Close quote. So this then makes you understand, he says that they're coming to him out of the land of the Sudan, so they'll make their way across from there. And he said, you'll be overthrown and turned out of your land by the Abyssinians, and they'll rule from Ebian to Najran. Right? And that portion will include, now he mentions, before it was the expanse of undivided Yemen. But now it's Yemen into interior Arabia. So as the Shiqq is interpreting the data, it's actually getting worse because more is happening. So now the Abyssinians are closer to the attack, which means they're on the way. And also their rule has expanded. So his response then, you can tell from the fright in his voice when the Imam says, quote, فَقَالَ لَهُ الْمَلِكُ وَأَبِيكَ يَا شِقّ إِنَّ هَذَا لَنَا لِغَائِذِ مُوجِعٍ فَمَتَى هُوَ كَائِنٌ أَنِّي زَمَانِي أفي زماني أم بعده؟ قال لا بل بعده بزمان ثم يستنقذكم منها عظيم ذو شأن ويذيقهم أشد الهوان. The king said to him, by your father Shiqq, this news is a catastrophe to hear. When shall these things be? When will it be? Will it be in my time or after? The Shiqq said, no, on the contrary, it shall be after your time by a little bit. Then someone shall seek your safety from them who is mighty in strength and importance. He shall make the people to taste the worst of affairs. قال ومن هذا العظيم الشأن؟ قال غلام ليس بدني ولا مدن يخرج عليهم من بيت ذي يزن فلا يترك أحدا منهم باليمن. قال أفيدوم سلطانه أم ينقطع؟ قال بل ينقطع برسول مرسل يأتي بالحق والعدل بين أهل الدين والفضل يكون الملك في قومه إلى يوم الفصل. The king said, who is this one who is mighty in strength and importance? The Shiqq responded, there shall be a youth, neither from the countryside or the city, but weak in constitution, but mighty in importance. And there shall come to them someone from a city called Dhu Yazin, and he shall not leave one of them of this army in Yemen. The king asked about the end of the reign. So will his reign always be, or will it be interrupted? The Shiqq replied, no, the reign will be interrupted, and it will be by a messenger sent with the truth and justice among the people of religion and goodness. The kingdom will remain in his people until the day of sorting out. Close quote. So we see here then, he gives additional data on Dhu Yazin, that he won't be either Bedawi, he won't be a Bedouin, and he won't be Habari. He won't be a settled Arab, and he won't be based solely in the city or the countryside. He's something in between that. But he shall come and be the main force that drives out the Abyssinians. But then he says that there will be a messenger sent with the truth and justice among the people of religion and goodness. So now he's mentioning the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ again, but with more detail than what the Satih gave. More detail, more information, and more data that they had not, that the king was not expecting. So he's slowly being filled in, and he's now something's being made reference to on Yom al-Fasl, known as Yom al-Fasl, the day of sorting out. So the previous one had been a reference to a day in which the first and last shall be resurrected on a great day. Now the king is being told that that day is also known as a day of sorting out. So let's look at what information now the king receives from the Shiqq. Quote, قال وما يوم الفصل؟ قال يوم تجزى فيه اللات ويدعى فيه من السماء بدعوات يسمع منها الأحياء والأموات ويجمع فيه بين الناس للميقات يكون فيه لمن اتقى الفوز والخيرات. The king asked, what is the day of sorting out? The Shiqq answered, this is the day in which every allegiance will be rewarded, and every one that gave allegiance shall be rewarded according to his allegiance. The living and the dead will be called with speech from the sky and will answer. The people at that time will be gathered to the place of meeting. Whoever had fear at that point, taqwa of Allah on that day, will have everlasting salvation and goodness. قال حق ما تقول قال أي ورب السماء والأرض وما بينهما من رفع وخفض إنما أنبأتك به الحق ما فيه أمض. The king could not wait and asked, are you sure of the truth of what you say? The Shiqq replied immediately, yes, by the Lord of the sky and earth and what is between them, by the one who raised them and lowered the earth. What I have informed you of is true, and I have said no falsehood to you. فوقع في نفس ربيعة بن نصر ما قال فجهز بنيه وأهل بيته إلى العراق بما يصلحهم وكتب لهم إلى ملك من ملوك فارس يقال له سابور بن خرازاد فأسكنهم الحيرة. The king took in the words that the Satih and the Shiqq had said, and he readied his children, family, and set out for Iraq, as was best for them, and sent an escort and a letter along with them to one of the kings of Persia by the name of Sabur ibn Khurrazad. Then the king housed them in Hira or Hira. Close quote. So we then see that the Shiqq finishes off the conversation by defining what is this Yawm al-Fasl. And he says it's a day in which every allegiance will be rewarded. Again, telling him about a day of resurrection in which the living and the dead will be called with speech from the sky and they will answer, which means they'll be resurrected. So he's not talking about a mental resurrection. He's not talking about a raising of ideas or some type of new age in which people will become more spiritually attuned. No, he's talking about an actual resurrection in which those who are long dead in their graves shall be quickened and made to bear an account. And there will be a place of meeting and accounting. And that whoever had taqwa or fear of Allah will have everlasting salvation and goodness. Now you can also notice by what he's saying that the Satih and the Shiqq, when they're speaking, their statements actually rhyme. And so the rhyming that's being said, for example, when Ibn Hisham says the last part, قال ابن هشام أمض يعني شكا هذا بلغة حميار وقال أبو عمرو أمض أي باطل. So when the Imam Hisham al-Basri rahimahullah says like words like amad, the word amad is being made to rhyme with khafad, right, which was the word before, right, which he says that it implies the word doubt. And this is Himyar language, which means that the Shiqq is using Yemeni language, although we don't know where the Shiqq and the Satih are from, but they're using the language that Rabi'ah ibn Nasr would understand. And so Abu Amr said Amad means batil. So they didn't use the word batil, they used the word Amad in order that Rabi'ah ibn Nasr would be able to grasp it better because it's in his particular form of Arabic that he's speaking. So when he's being told of this information about a day of resurrection, he's being told twice. And if you look at how the conversation follows, the Satih gives detailed information, but the Shiqq builds on that detailed information. So he actually gives more information, builds on top of it, and also gives more details about each question that the king asks. And this is a very powerful witness that he's being given. And so when in the response to that, now that he's convinced by two different accounts given by two different people who don't have time to share stories or to collude with information, he's now convinced. Which in that case, the king takes the words that the Satih and the Shiqq, they have an impact on him. So he gathers his children, his family, and they head for Iraq in the area of Hira or Hira, and he houses them there. And they decide they're going to wait out the rest of this catastrophe that's going to happen to them. Because the king refers to this situation, he says, by your father, Shiqq, this news is a catastrophe to hear. When shall these things be? So he understands that this is a catastrophe to come because it will completely overthrow the Yemen and change everything in a way that it hasn't been changed before. So the point that's being given now is now Yemen is about to undergo a huge change. And as the progress of history happens, more puzzle pieces get put into place in the run-up to the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because in order for these things, these visions to have been received, all of these things have to be in place for him to be born at the right place, at the right time, to fulfill the prophecies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained. Now, someone may ask, were the Shiqq and the Satih, were these Muslims? How did they get this information? How did they know how to interpret? If the Arabs had denied the resurrection with the exception of the Hunafa, the faithful ones that were saved from Jahiliyyah, the Jews and Christians, wouldn't that mean that the Shiqq and the Satih had to belong to one of those categories? What were they? It had been mentioned before that they were kahinain, soothsayers, or these type of people. So does that mean then that they were guilty of kufr? And what does all of this entail? This, insha'Allah, will be covered in our next lesson to come, insha'Allah, where we will lay out a little bit more about the Shiqq and Satih, how they came to get that information, and then we'll also talk about the outcome of what they have said. Because now we're going to come to the conquest of Abu Karb at-Tuban over the kingdom of Yemen, what that means, and then the eventual arrival of the Abyssinians after a period of time, as well as the origin of Judaism in Yemen. So once we come to these areas, we'll be one footstep closer to the Abyssinian arrival, the rise of Christianity in Najran, and the affairs immediately connected to that, and how Christianity arrived. Because all of these things are important and set the stage so when the Abyssinians arrive, all of what is necessary to have the pieces in place for them to do what it is they're going to do when they arrive will all of a sudden make sense to the listener. But in the meantime, understand that Rabi' ibn Nasr has now self-abdicated because of this vision that he saw. And when the vision was interpreted by the Shiqq and the Satih, he gathers his family, which includes his children and the rest of those that will listen, and he self-abdicates and he flees to Iraq, which means that the area is no longer being administered by him. And why did he flee to Iraq as well, as which is something that we have to establish our next class, inshallah. So why does he flee to Iraq? He could have fled to anywhere. Why did he flee to Iraq? How did the Shiqq and the Satih know how to interpret the data? And the significance of the takeover of Yemen by someone else after his time, the introduction of Judaism into Arabiya. How did Judaism arrive in Arabiya? And also Christianity arriving in Arabiya through the Najran, the significance of that, and why all of those play an important part in history when the Abyssinians arrive in the area. So it is our sincere hope, inshallah, that the listeners will benefit from that, and inshallah we're looking to take this away. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the believers. We say, Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk innahu ghafurur rahim yarhamur rahim wa la ilaha illa Allah. Wassalamu alaikum.